I gripped the steering wheel of my rusted Ford F-150 so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought I was driving to my son-in-law Toby house to surprise my daughter Sarah with a basket of organic apples from my small farm. Instead, I found myself parked behind a dense row of hedges staring at a silver Mercedes that shouldn't have been there. It was my wife, Catherine Carr. She had told me explicitly that morning she would be volunteering at the downtown shelter 30 miles away. Yet here she was tucked away at the service entrance of the mansion I had secretly paid the down payment for. My gut twisted, but not with the jealousy of a husband suspecting an affair. It was something darker, a primal instinct screaming that the woman I had shared 40 years with was dangerous. I killed the engine and approached the house not like a visiting father-in-law, but like the construction contractor I used to be silently checking the perimeter. I knew the code to the side garage door because I was the one who installed it. I crept through the shadows until I reached the study window, which was cracked open just an inch to let in the autumn breeze. I expected to hear whispers of romance. What I heard instead shattered my reality and nearly brought me to my knees. "Has the old man taken the blue pill yet, Toby?" Voice drifted out cold and impatient. "We are running out of time, Catherine. The loan sharks are giving me until Friday." "Don't worry, my love," Catherine's voice replied, sending a shiver of revulsion down my spine. It wasn't the tone of a lover, but of a conspirator. I crush it into his soup every night. He trusts me blindly. He thinks it is just a vitamin supplement. 3 more doses, and his brain will be mush. He won't even remember his own name, let alone who owns the farm. I froze my hand hovering over my chest. They weren't having an affair. They were murdering me. Slowly, methodically. "Just make sure he signs the power of attorney before he goes completely vegetable," Toby sneered. "Once we have that signature, I can liquidate his retirement fund and sell that useless farm. We will put him in the cheapest state facility we can find and tell Sarah it was for his own safety." "Don't let Sarah know," Catherine warned sharply. "She is too soft. She actually loves the old fool. If she finds out we are speeding up his dementia, she will ruin everything." I backed away from the window, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My breath came in shallow gasps. My wife. The woman I had built a life with was poisoning me to cover her son in law gambling debts. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I hit record. I needed proof. I needed to capture their laughter as they toasted to my demise. I stood there for 2 minutes recording the blueprint of my own destruction before slipping back into the shadows. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I did what I have done all my life when facing a structural collapse. I assessed the damage and prepared to rebuild. I drove home in a daze, my eyes fixed on the road, but my mind replaying the conversation. Power of attorney. Blue pills. Liquidate. They thought I was just a retired builder living on a pension. They saw my old truck, my flannel shirts, and my coupons, and assumed I was a simple man with a simple savings account. They had no idea who William Harrington really was. They didn't know that 20 years ago I sold my construction empire for $15 million. I had hidden the money in a blind trust, shielding it from the very greed that was now trying to kill me. I had lived frugally to teach my family the value of hard work, but it seemed the only lesson they learned was how to be predators. I arrived at our modest farmhouse 20 minutes before Catherine. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the family photos on the wall. Catherine and I at Niagara Falls. Sarah graduation. Toby and Sarah wedding where I had paid for everything anonymously. I looked at the face of the woman in the frame and tried to find the monster she had become. The front door opened, and Catherine breezed in carrying the scent of expensive perfume and the lie of a long day at the charity shelter. "Bill, honey, are you home?" she called out, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that now made me nauseous. "I am in the kitchen, Catherine," I replied, keeping my voice steady, forcing my body to relax into the posture of a tired old man. She walked in looking impeccable, not a hair out of place. Oh, you look exhausted, darling. I stopped by the market on the way back from the shelter. I am going to make you your favorite tomato bisque. You need your strength. My strength. She meant she needed me weak enough to sign away my life. I watched her move around the kitchen, the same kitchen where we had raised our daughter. She hummed a melody as she chopped vegetables, her back to me. I saw her reach into her purse and pull out a small blue vial. She glanced over her shoulder, checking if I was watching. I closed my eyes, feigning a nap. The sound of a mortar and pestle grinding against ceramic echoed in the room, the sound of my execution being prepared. "Here you go, Bill. Eat it while it is hot," she said, placing the steaming bowl in front of me. The red soup looked inviting, but I knew it was a cocktail of chemical restraints. "Thank you, Catherine," I said, my hand shaking intentionally as I picked up the spoon. "You always take such good care of me." "Always," she smiled, watching me with the intensity of a hawk. "Eat up." I took a spoonful, bringing it to my lips, but then I dropped my napkin. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered, bending down under the table. In that split second of concealment, I poured the spoonful into a plastic Ziploc bag I had taped inside my wide flannel sleeve. I repeated this dance, eating a little bread, creating a mess, acting the part of the deteriorating senior they wanted me to be. After 10 minutes, I pushed the half-empty bowl away. "I feel dizzy, Catherine. My head. It feels like cotton." "That is just the fatigue, Bill," she said, moving closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. Her touch felt like ice. "Why don't you go rest in the recliner? I will handle everything." I stumbled toward the living room, dragging my feet, allowing my eyelids to droop. I collapsed into my leather armchair, letting my mouth hang open slightly, mimicking the deep sleep of the medicated. Through my eyelashes, I watched her. Catherine didn't clean up. She walked straight to the hallway and pulled out her phone. "It is done," she whispered, her voice devoid of any warmth. "He is out cold, Toby. The dose was strong today. He is slurring his words and stumbling. He is ready." I heard Toby's voice on the other end, tinny and frantic. "Good. Get the papers ready. Tomorrow we bring in the doctor. My friend says he can certify him as incompetent by noon. We will have him in the facility by the weekend." "Do it," Catherine hissed. "I can't stand playing the nurse anymore. I want this over. I want my money." She hung up and looked at me one last time. Her face wasn't the face of a wife looking at her husband. It was the face of a vulture looking at a carcass. She turned off the lights, leaving me in the darkness of the living room. I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut upstairs. Then I opened my eyes. The fog they hoped to create in my mind was non-existent. In its place was a cold, crystal-clear rage. They wanted a senile old man. Fine. I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. But while they were busy preparing my committal papers, I would be preparing their indictment. I slowly sat up and reached for the burner phone I kept taped under the seat of the recliner, a habit from my days negotiating high-stakes contracts in dangerous neighborhoods. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Blackwood. It is Harrington." The voice on the other end was rough, surprised. "William, I thought you retired to grow corn and play grandpa. Why are you calling me on the emergency line?" "I am done playing grandpa," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the stairs. "I need you to open the vault, reactivate the holding companies. And Blackwood, I need a private investigator and a forensic toxicologist at my farmhouse within the hour. Park down the road. I have a sample of soup for you." There was a pause, and then I heard the smile in Blackwood's voice. "Welcome back to the game, William. Who is the target?" "My wife and my son-in-law," I said, feeling the last remnants of my old life burn away. "They think they are hunting a helpless deer. I need you to show them they just stepped into a cage with a lion." I hung up and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the house that had become my prison. Tomorrow, they would bring their fake doctor. Tomorrow, they would try to erase William Harrington. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed my silence was weakness. They assumed my thrift was poverty. And tomorrow, when they tried to spring their trap, they were going to find out exactly what happens when you corner a man who has built skyscrapers from the mud up. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The first clash was over. The war had just begun. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty curtains, hitting my face with a cruel cheerfulness. I woke up with a stiff neck from sleeping in the armchair, but I didn't move. I had to maintain the charade. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and confident. It was Toby. He had arrived early. I heard him whispering with Catherine in the kitchen. "Where is his wallet?" Catherine asked. "I took it from the nightstand while he was passed out," Toby replied. "And his keys. He is not going anywhere today. We can't risk him driving off and causing a scene." I felt a surge of anger. They were stripping me of my autonomy piece by piece. I let out a groan, shifting in the chair. "He is waking up," Catherine hissed. "Go get Dr. Evans. Remember, he is confused. He is aggressive. That is the narrative." Toby walked into the living room accompanied by a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a white coat, but his shoes were scuffed and his shirt was untucked. He looked more like a racetrack regular than a medical professional. Dad Toby said, his voice loud and condescending, like he was talking to a toddler. "This is Dr. Evans. He is a specialist. He is here to check on you." I blinked rapidly, looking around with feigned confusion. "Who? Where is my truck? I need to go to the hardware store." "You don't have a truck, Bill," Catherine said, entering the room with a look of practiced pity. "You sold it years ago. Don't you remember?" She was gaslighting me, rewriting my history in real time. "I did not sell it." I snapped, adding a tremor to my voice. "It is in the driveway." Dr. Evans stepped forward, shining a penlight into my eyes aggressively. Aggression, confusion, disorientation, classic signs of advanced cognitive decline. He hasn't even asked me a question yet, I thought, but I played along, swatting his hand away. "Get that light out of my face." "Who are you people?" "See," Toby said, turning to the fake doctor. "He gets violent. Yesterday he threw a cup at Mom. I never threw anything." But I saw the doctor nodding, scribbling on a clipboard. "Mr. Harrington, do you know what year it is?" the doctor asked. "It is," I paused, pretending to struggle. 1998. The doctor exchanged a smirk with Toby. "Severe temporal dislocation. I think we have enough for the emergency custody order. It is unsafe for him to be alone." Catherine let out a sob, a perfect theatrical performance. "Oh, my poor Bill. I just want him to be safe, doctor. If a facility is the only way, then I suppose I must sign." They were doing it right in front of me, discussing my incarceration as if I were a piece of furniture to be moved. "Sign here, Mrs. Harrington," the doctor said, handing her a clipboard. "This grants immediate medical guardianship to you and your son-in-law. We can transport him this afternoon." I watched Catherine sign. Her hand didn't shake. She signed away my freedom with the same ease she signed for a package delivery. "I need to use the bathroom," I mumbled, standing up and swaying intentionally. "Make it quick, old man," Toby muttered under his breath as I passed him. I shuffled to the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask any noise. I knelt down and reached behind the toilet tank where I had taped the burner phone the night before. I had one text message from Blackwood. Sample confirmed. High levels of benzodiazepines and sedatives. Police report drafted. Financials on Toby Vance ready. He is in the hole for $500,000 to the Kartsev syndicate. Catherine owes $200,000 on credit cards. They are desperate. Do not let them take you. Get out. I stared at the screen. $500,000. Toby wasn't just a gambler. He was a dead man, walking unless he got my money. That explained the rush. That explained the sloppiness. They weren't just greedy, they were terrified. I flushed the toilet and splashed water on my face. I looked at my reflection. The gray hair, the wrinkles, the tired eyes. They saw a victim. I saw a man who had survived recessions, labor strikes, and corporate wars. I wasn't going to a facility. I unlocked the door and stepped out. Toby was waiting in the hallway, his arms crossed, blocking the path to the front door. "Where do you think you're going, Dad?" "Back to the chair. The transport van will be here in an hour." "I need fresh air," I said, my voice raspy. "Just to the porch." "No," Toby said, stepping forward. "You stay put." He reached out to grab my arm. That was his mistake. He thought he was grabbing a frail old man. As his hand closed around my bicep, I didn't pull away. I stepped into him. I used a leverage technique I learned in the Marine Corps 50 years ago, a muscle memory that hadn't faded with age. I grabbed his wrist, twisted it outward, and drove my shoulder into his chest. Toby's eyes widened in shock as he stumbled back, losing his balance. He crashed into the hallway table, knocking over a vase. "What the hell?" he shouted, clutching his wrist. Catherine screamed from the living room. "What did you do, Bill?" I didn't answer. I moved with a speed that surprised even me. I bolted for the kitchen, not the front door. The back door key hung on a hook by the fridge. I grabbed it and burst out into the cool morning air. "Stop him!" Toby yelled, scrambling to his feet. I ran toward the garage. My truck keys were gone, stolen by Catherine, but I didn't need them. I kept a spare magnetic key hidden inside the rear wheel well. I dropped to my knees, fumbling for the small black box. My fingers brushed against it just as the back door flew open. Two men, large, burly orderlies hired by the fake doctor, were charging across the lawn. "Get him!" Toby screamed from the porch. "Don't let him leave!" I grabbed the key, jammed it into the door lock, and threw myself into the cab. The engine roared to life with a familiar cough and sputter. I threw it into reverse just as one of the orderlies reached the door handle. I slammed on the gas. The truck lurched backward, knocking the man off balance. I spun the wheel, shifting into drive. The metal gate at the end of the driveway was closed. Toby had locked it. He stood on the porch, a smug look returning to his face. "You are trapped, old man," he yelled. I looked at the gate. It was wrought iron decorative installed by a subcontractor Toby had hired 2 years ago. I knew for a fact Toby had pocketed half the budget and used cheap hollow aluminum instead of solid steel. I shifted gears and floored the accelerator. The old Ford engine howled. No, Toby screamed, realizing what I was doing. I hit the gate at 40 miles per hour. The metal screeched and buckled like tin foil. The truck shuddered but broke through the windshield, cracking but holding. I didn't look back. I sped down the country road, leaving my home, my wife, and my former life in a cloud of dust. I drove for an hour, checking my mirrors constantly, until I reached the city limits. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a glass skyscraper that pierced the Chicago skyline. I took the private elevator to the penthouse floor. The doors opened into a sleek, modern lobby. A receptionist looked up, startled by my appearance. A disheveled old man in a flannel shirt with a bleeding cut on his forehead. "Sir, you can't be up here," she started. "Tell Blackwood that Bill Harrington is here," I said, my voice hard as granite. "And get me a scotch." "Neat." A moment later, the double mahogany doors swung open. Arthur Blackwood, the city's most feared corporate attorney, walked out, his arms open. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and a smile that could cut glass. "William," he said, gripping my hand, "you look like hell. I feel like it." I admitted, collapsing onto a leather sofa. Blackwood handed me a tablet. "We have everything. The toxicology report is admissible in court. The investigator has photos of the doctor receiving an envelope of cash from Toby this morning. And we tracked the money. Toby has been embezzling from the construction firm he manages." "The firm I own," I said quietly. "The firm you own anonymously," Blackwood corrected. He has been stealing from you to pay his gambling debts, and now he tried to kill you to cover the hole. I stared at the city below. My daughter Sarah. Does she know? Blackwood's expression softened. We tried to reach her. Catherine got to her first. She told Sarah you had a violent psychotic break and attacked Toby. She told her you are dangerous and missing. Sarah is terrified, Bill. She is signing the commitment papers as next of kin right now because she thinks it is the only way to help you. My heart sank. They had weaponized my daughter Love against me. I need to talk to her. Not yet, Blackwood said firmly. If you go to her now, you are a fugitive madman. We need to flip the script. We need to show her the truth, not just tell her. How? Blackwood pointed to a calendar on the wall. Tomorrow night, the Vanguard Construction Gala. Toby is receiving the Project Manager of the Year award. He thinks the owner of the holding company is finally going to reveal himself and promote him to CEO. I looked at the calendar. It was perfect. The entire industry would be there. The press. My family. Toby is expecting a promotion. I said, a cold smile touching my lips. He is, Blackwood agreed. Let's give him a retirement party instead. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. My reflection ghosted against the glass overlapping with the city I had helped build. Get me a suit, Blackwood, and get the barber. The old man is dead. The chairman is coming back. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the safe house Blackwood provided, watching the live feed from the hidden cameras in my own home. I saw Catherine pacing the living room, drinking wine straight from the bottle. I saw Toby arguing with someone on the phone, his face sweaty and pale. He is gone, Catherine screamed at him. If he goes to the police, we are finished. He is demented, Toby yelled back. No one will believe him. We just need to find him before he crashes that truck into a tree. We stick to the story. He is sick. He is dangerous. We are the victims. I watched them spin their web of lies tighter and tighter, unaware that the spider was already in the room with them. The next evening, I stood backstage at the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. I was wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit that cost more than Toby Carr. My hair was trimmed, my face clean-shaven. I looked 20 years younger and infinitely more dangerous. On the other side of the heavy velvet curtain, I could hear the murmur of the crowd. I heard Toby's voice amplified by the microphone. I want to thank my family, he was saying, his voice thick with false humility. My wife, Sarah, who is my rock, and my mother-in-law, Catherine, who has been a pillar of strength during a very difficult family tragedy. As many of you know, my father-in-law is currently missing, suffering from severe mental health issues. We ask for your prayers. A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. He was using my tragedy to build his brand. And now Toby continued, his voice rising with excitement. It is my distinct honor to welcome the mysterious founder of Harrington Holdings, the man who has mentored me from the shadows. Please welcome Mr. X. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the stage. The curtain began to rise. I stepped into the light. The applause started, then faltered, then died completely. Toby dropped his glass. It shattered on the stage, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Catherine, who was standing in the front row, put a hand to her mouth, her eyes bulging. Sarah stood up, her face a mask of confusion. Dad. I walked to the microphone. The silence was absolute. I looked at Toby, who was trembling so hard his knees were knocking together. I looked at Catherine, who was shrinking into her seat. I looked at my daughter, who looked like a lost child. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice booming through the hall. My name is William Harrington. I am not missing. I am not crazy. And I am the owner of this company. A gasp went through the room. Toby tried to grab the microphone. Dad, you are confused. You shouldn't be here. I caught his wrist, the same one I had twisted yesterday. Sit down, Toby, I said, my voice low and lethal. We have some business to discuss. I signaled to the tech booth. The giant screen behind me lit up. It wasn't a corporate logo. It was a video. Grainy night vision footage. It was the video from my kitchen. Toby turning the gas valve on the stove. The crowd erupted. That is not all I said. The image changed. A bank statement. Highlighting unauthorized transfers of $3 million from the company accounts to an offshore gambling site. Toby Vance, I said, turning to my son-in-law, who was now kneeling on the stage weeping. You are not receiving a promotion tonight. You are receiving an audit. I pointed to the side entrance. 2 FBI agents walked in, followed by Detective Miller from the local precinct. Catherine tried to run. She made it to the exit doors before 2 officers blocked her path. This is a lie, she screamed, pointing at me. He is insane! That is a deepfake. I looked at Sarah. She was standing alone in the middle of the chaos, tears streaming down her face, looking from her husband to her mother, to me. Sarah, I said, my voice softening. I am sorry you had to find out this way. But they were killing me. Literally. I gestured to the screen again. The toxicology report appeared. Lethal levels of sedatives. Sarah looked at her mother. Mom, is it true? Catherine's face twisted into a snarl. He is a selfish old miser, Sarah. He has millions. Millions. And he made us live like peasants. I did it for us. That was the confession. The room went silent again. Sarah backed away from her mother, horror dawning in her eyes. The police handcuffed Toby on stage. He was sobbing, begging for mercy, blaming Catherine, blaming the loan sharks, blaming everyone but himself. I walked over to him. I leaned down so only he could hear me. You wanted my money, Toby. You wanted the power. Well, now you have the attention of the most powerful people in the city. Enjoy it. As they dragged him away, I stood center stage alone. The applause didn't return. There was only the heavy, somber weight of the truth. I had won. I had saved my life. I had reclaimed my empire. But as I looked at my daughter broken and weeping in the aisle, I knew the cost of this victory would be paid for the rest of our lives. But I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, I was in control. The lion had left the cage and he wasn't going back in. Sunlight sliced through the gaps in the heavy velvet curtains, assaulting my eyes with a brightness that felt mocking. I sat up in bed, allowing a groan to escape my lips. A sound that was half performance and half genuine stiffness from sleeping in a tension-filled house. My hand instinctively reached for the nightstand, seeking the cold metal of my truck keys and the familiar leather of my wallet. My fingers brushed against nothing but bare, polished wood. The space was empty. My phone, my wallet, my keys, my connection to the outside world, all gone. Panic flared in my chest for a brief second before I extinguished it with the cold water of logic. This was part of their script. I was supposed to be the confused, disoriented old man who misplaced his belongings. The bedroom door creaked open. Catherine entered carrying a tray with tea and toast. She wore a floral apron over her designer clothes, a costume of domesticity that fit her as poorly as a cheap suit. "Good morning, darling," she cooed, placing the tray on my lap. "How are we feeling today?" I rubbed my temples, feigning a headache. "Catherine, I can't find my things, my keys, my wallet. I left them right here last night." She sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of weary patience. "Oh, Bill, we talked about this. You lost them yesterday afternoon. You left them at the grocery store, remember? We spent an hour looking for them." She said it with such conviction, such practiced pity, that a weaker man might have doubted his own sanity. But I remembered exactly where I had put them. I remembered locking them in the top drawer, which was now unlocked and empty. I don't remember that, I mumbled, looking down at the toast. That is what worries me, she said, stroking my hair. Her touch made my skin crawl. Your memory is getting worse by the day. But don't worry. Toby is coming over. He is bringing a specialist to see you. A very expensive neurologist. We just want to help you. The trap was set. They weren't wasting any time. An hour later, I was seated in the living room, dressed in the mismatched clothes Catherine had laid out for me, enhancing my appearance of senility. Toby walked in, exuding the nervous energy of a man with a deadline. Behind him walked a man who looked nothing like a neurologist. He wore a white coat that seemed a size too small and carried a leather briefcase that looked brand new. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the value of the paintings and antiques rather than the patient. Dad, Toby said, his voice loud and slow. This is Dr. Marcus Thorne. He is a friend from the club. He agreed to make a house call to evaluate your condition. Dr. Thorne sat opposite me, crossing his legs. I noticed the mud on his shoes and the faint smell of stale cigar smoke clinging to his clothes. He didn't smell like a hospital. He smelled like a backroom poker game. Mr. Harrington. He began pulling out a penlight. I am going to ask you a few simple questions. Is that all right? I stared at him blankly, letting my jaw slacken slightly. Who are you again? I am the doctor, he repeated, exchanging a smirk with Toby. Tell me, what year is it? I paused, letting the silence stretch. I watched Toby tap his foot impatiently. 19, I started, my voice trembling. 1998. Toby let out a dramatic sigh. See? I told you. He thinks Clinton is still president. Dr. Thorne scribbled something on a notepad that I could see was blank. Severe temporal disorientation, he muttered. Let us try some math. What is 100 minus 7? I furrowed my brow, pretending to exert immense mental effort. 90. No. 82. Cognitive decline is evident, Thorne declared, closing his notepad without writing another word. He turned to Catherine and Toby. In my professional opinion, Mr. Harrington is suffering from advanced early-onset dementia. He is a danger to himself. He cannot be left alone, and he certainly cannot manage his own affairs. Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, producing a sob that was worthy of a daytime soap opera. Oh God, is it that bad? It is critical, Thorne said gravely. I recommend immediate institutionalization for his own safety. I can sign the necessary paperwork right now to grant you temporary medical and financial guardianship. Do it, Toby said too quickly. We have to protect him. I sat there slumped in the chair, listening to them discuss stripping me of my rights, my freedom, and my dignity. Inside, my mind was racing, cataloging every detail. I looked at the fake doctor name tag. It was crooked. Dr. M. Thorne, Chief of Neurology. I memorized the face. I had seen him before, not at a hospital, but in a photo on Toby's social media from a Las Vegas trip 3 years ago. His name wasn't Thorne. It was something like Mickey or Mike. I am tired, I mumbled, closing my eyes. I want to sleep. Let him rest, Catherine said. The sedative is still working. We can finish the paperwork in the kitchen. They left me alone in the living room, confident that the vegetable in the chair wasn't going anywhere. I heard their footsteps recede down the hallway, followed by the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating early. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. When I heard Toby laughing loudly from the kitchen, I moved. I didn't shuffle. I moved with the silent precision of a hunter. I slipped out of the chair and headed not for the front door, but for the heavy oak door under the stairs that led to the basement storage. This was my domain, the place where I kept my tools, my old blueprints, and my secrets. I descended the stairs silently, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The air down here was cool and smelled of sawdust and oil. I went to the far corner where a heavy workbench stood bolted to the floor. I knelt and felt under the bottom shelf. There was a small latch. I triggered it, and a section of the floorboard popped up. Inside lay my contingency plan. A small fireproof safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 15, left to 8. The lock clicked open. Inside sat a burner phone fully charged, a stack of cash, and a passport. I grabbed the phone and powered it on. My hands were steady now. The trembling old man was gone. I dialed a number that I knew better than my own social security number. 1 ring. 2 rings. Blackwood, a deep, gravelly voice answered. Arthur. It is Bill, I said, my voice low and hard as steel. The game has started. William Blackwood replied, his tone shifting instantly from professional to alert. Are you safe? For now. They brought in a fake doctor, a poker buddy of Toby named Thorne. They are drawing up guardianship papers as we speak. They think I am senile. I can have a team there in 20 minutes, Blackwood said. No, I ordered. Not yet. I need to tighten the noose. I need you to do 2 things immediately. First, run a full background check on a Marcus Thorne and cross-reference him with Toby Gambling Associates. Second, I need you to pull the financial records for Toby Vance and Catherine Harrington. I want to know exactly how much they owe and to whom. Dig deep, Arthur. I want to know every cent. Consider it done, Blackwood said. Anything else? Yes, I said, looking at the plastic bag of soup I had smuggled into my pocket the night before. I have a sample of the food they tried to feed me. I am going to leave it in the mailbox at the end of the lane in 10 minutes. Send a courier. I want a full toxicology screen. If they are poisoning me, I want the science to prove it. I will handle it, Blackwood promised. William, be careful. If they realize you are lucid, they won't. I cut him off. They are too blinded by their own greed. They see what they want to see. I hung up and placed the phone back in the safe. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the basement. This was the foundation. From here, I would tear their world apart, brick by brick. I closed the safe, replaced the floorboard, and ascended the stairs, transforming back into the confused, helpless old man before I even reached the top. They wanted a show. I would give them one they would never forget. The heavy oak door of my bedroom was locked from the outside. I could hear the faint, rhythmic thud of heavy footsteps in the hallway, the hired muscle Toby had brought in to ensure my safety. They thought I was sedated, a crumbling ruin of a man fading into the twilight of dementia. They didn't know I was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, my mind sharpened by adrenaline and the cold, hard realization of my reality. I needed to reach Sarah. My daughter was the only variable in this equation I couldn't calculate. I had raised her to be kind, to be just. I had paid for her education, walked her down the aisle, and held her hand when she was sick. I refused to believe she was part of this. She was being manipulated, a pawn in Catherine and Toby's twisted game. I had to warn her before she signed anything that would make her an accomplice to my murder. I couldn't use the burner phone for this. If I called her cell from an unknown number, she might not answer, or worse, Toby might be with her monitoring her calls. I needed to hear her voice without the risk of electronic trails leading back to my secret stash in the basement. I moved to the window. It was a second-story drop, but 20 years ago I had built a trellis for Catherine's climbing roses against this very wall. I checked the hallway one last time through the keyhole. The guard was distracted, scrolling on his phone. I opened the window silently. The cold air hit my face, bracing me. I climbed out my boots, finding purchase on the thick, woody vines. The thorns tore at my hands and flannel shirt, drawing blood, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the ticking clock of my own survival. I reached the ground and melted into the shadows of the garden I had planted, moving away from the house toward the main road. There was a payphone at the old gas station, a mile down the road. A relic from a bygone era that, like me, society had deemed obsolete. I walked briskly, keeping to the tree line, my breath forming clouds in the crisp air. When I reached the booth, I fumbled for change with trembling fingers, dropping a quarter into the slot. I dialed Sarah's direct line at the library where she worked. 1 ring. 2. Sarah Vance speaking. Her voice answered, professional and soft. Sarah? I exhaled, leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the booth. It's Dad. There was a silence on the other end, heavy and immediate. It wasn't the silence of surprise. It was the silence of judgment. Dad, she said, her tone shifting from professional to icy. Where are you? Mom said you were resting. She said you were sedated. I am not sedated, Sarah. I am not sick, I said, urgency creeping into my voice. You have to listen to me. Toby and your mother, they are lying to you. They brought in a fake doctor. They are trying to... Stop it! She cut me off. Her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Just stop. Mom told me everything. I froze. What did she tell you? She told me about this morning, Sarah cried. She sent me the pictures, Dad. The bruises on her arms. She said you attacked her. She said you were screaming about people stealing your money, about conspiracies. She said you didn't even recognize her. My stomach dropped. Catherine. She had painted bruises on herself. She had staged a domestic assault to validate the narrative of my insanity. It was a masterstroke of evil. Sarah, I never touched her. I pleaded, my grip on the receiver tightening. I have never raised a hand to your mother in 40 years. You know me. You know who I am. I thought I did, Sarah replied, and I could hear the tears in her voice. But Toby says the dementia is making you paranoid and violent. He says it's the frontal lobe deteriorating. That's why you're making up these stories about them hurting you. It's projection, Dad. Toby is a liar, I growled. He is drowning in debt, Sarah. That's why they are doing this. They need my money. Money, what money? Sarah snapped. You live on a pension, Dad. You drive a 20-year-old truck. We are the ones supporting you. Toby has been paying your property taxes for years. He told me. The lie was so total, so complete, it took the wind out of me. Toby claiming credit for my charity. Toby, the man who was stealing from my company, claiming to support me. Sarah, please, I whispered, feeling a tear trace a hot path down my cold cheek. I am begging you, do not sign anything. If they bring you papers for guardianship, for power of attorney, do not sign them. Come see me. Look me in the eyes. I can't, she said, her voice cold and distant now. Toby says it's not safe. He says you're unstable. He advised me to keep my distance until you're stabilized in the facility. I think he's right. I think you need help. Sarah, goodbye, Dad. Please just go back to the house. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The line went dead. I stood there for a long time listening to the dial tone. It sounded like a flatline. My daughter, my little girl, was gone. They had taken her from me not by force but by twisting her love and trust against me. They had isolated me completely. In her eyes, I was no longer her father. I was a dangerous, confused burden that needed to be managed. I hung up the phone slowly. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. The house on the hill wasn't a home anymore. It was a nest of vipers, and now they had turned my own blood against me. I turned to leave the booth, intending to disappear into the woods to formulate a new plan, when the burner phone in my pocket vibrated against my hip. I pulled it out. It was Blackwood. Tell me you have something, Arthur, I answered, my voice devoid of hope. Because I just lost my daughter. I have more than something, William. Blackwood's voice came through sharp and urgent. My investigators just finished the deep dive into Toby's financials. It's worse than we thought. How bad? It's catastrophic, Blackwood said. Toby isn't just a casual gambler. He's in deep with the Kartsev Syndicate, a Russian loan shark operation out of Chicago. He owes them $500,000, William. Principal and interest. $500,000. I repeated the number, staggering me. That's not all, Blackwood continued. Catherine. She's been living a double life. The charity work, it's a cover. She's been frequenting underground high-stakes bridge clubs. She's leveraged herself to the hilt. She has maxed out 5 credit cards in your name, cards you didn't know existed, and she pawned her jewelry months ago. The diamonds she wears, high-grade fakes. She owes over $200,000. $700,000. That was the price of my life. They are desperate, William, Blackwood warned. I got word from a contact in the precinct. A Toby Vance took out a massive life insurance policy on you 3 months ago. Double indemnity for accidental death. They don't just want to institutionalize me. I realized the cold truth settling in my bones. The nursing home is just a holding cell. They need me dead. They have a deadline, Blackwood said. Our intel says the Kartsev syndicate gave Toby a grace period. It ends in 7 days. If he doesn't pay up by next Friday, he's a dead man. He needs access to your assets immediately. 7 days, I whispered. You have to get out of there, William. Now. They won't wait for the courts. If they can't get the power of attorney signed voluntarily, they will stage an accident. You are in imminent danger. I know, I said, looking back toward the house on the hill, where the lights were just starting to flicker on in the dusk. But I'm not running, Arthur. Not yet. William, don't be a fool. You have the money. You have the power. Come to the city. No, I said, my voice hardening into steel. They took my daughter. They tried to take my mind. If I run now, I'm just a victim. I need to be the executioner. What are you going to do? I'm going back, I said. They need a signature, I'll give them a signature. But it won't be on a power of attorney. William, get the papers ready, Arthur. Prepare the foreclosure on Toby's loans. Buy his debt, every cent of it. I want to own him. And dig up everything you can on that fake doctor. I want his license, his history, his vices. I want enough dirt to bury him. Consider it done, Blackwood said, his tone shifting from concern to professional lethality. But watch your back. You are sleeping with sharks. Sharks eat because they are hungry, I said, hanging up the phone. These two, they are just parasites, and I'm about to become the poison. I stepped out of the phone booth and into the gathering dark. I wasn't the confused old man anymore. I wasn't the heartbroken father. I was the contractor who knew how to demolish a rotting structure so that something new could be built on the ashes. I started the long walk back to the house, ready to play my part in their final act. The silence of the farmhouse was usually a comfort, a heavy blanket of peace that settled over the fields at night. But tonight, the silence was a predator. I lay in my bed, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, listening to the house settle. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2 a.m. Outside, the Chicago winter was howling, a relentless wind that rattled the siding and promised a temperature well below freezing. Inside, it should have been 68 degrees. It wasn't. I felt the drop in temperature before I saw it. The gentle hum of the furnace, a sound that had been the heartbeat of this house for 20 years, abruptly cut out. It wasn't a cycle ending. It was a manual shutoff. I lay still, my breath beginning to mist in the air above me. A few minutes later, my bedroom door creaked open. Through the slit of my eyelids, I saw a silhouette. It was Catherine. She moved with a stealth I didn't know she possessed. She crept toward the window, the one facing the north field where the wind was strongest. She unlatched it and slid it open all the way. An Arctic blast hit the room instantly, carrying snowflakes that danced in the pale moonlight. She stood there for a moment, shivering in her thick robe, looking at my form, huddled under the blankets. "Sweet dreams, old man," she whispered. Her voice was devoid of humanity. It was the sound of a ledger being balanced. She slipped out, locking the door from the outside. The click of the deadbolt was the sound of my execution order. They weren't waiting for the nursing home. They were trying to induce hypothermia. An old man, confused, opens a window in the middle of winter and freezes to death in his sleep. It happens. It's tragic. It's an accident. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. I threw off the covers. The cold bit into my skin, immediately aggressive and sharp. But they had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just a retired grandfather. I was a man who had built skyscrapers in January gales, who had laid pipelines in the frozen Dakotas. I knew cold, and I knew how to survive it. I moved the heavy oak dresser, revealing the false back of my closet. This was my go-bag stash, the remnants of a life lived on rugged job sites. I pulled out my thermal base layers, the heavy-duty heated vest I used to wear during site inspections, and my insulated Carhartt coveralls. I dressed quickly, the layers trapping my body heat. I pulled on thick wool socks and my steel-toed boots. I looked like I was ready to pour concrete in a blizzard, not sleep in my own bed. But the cold wasn't their only weapon tonight. I grabbed my phone and checked the feed from the button camera I had magnetized to the range hood in the kitchen earlier that evening. The screen glowed in the dark room. Toby was there. He was wearing gloves. He wasn't making a midnight snack. He was standing in front of the gas range, the high-end Wolf appliance I had installed for Catherine because she loved to cook. He reached out and turned the knob for the front burner. He didn't press the igniter. He just turned it enough to let the gas hiss. Then the second knob. Then the third. He stood there for a moment, listening to the hiss of the escaping gas. It was the sound of death. He was filling the house with a bomb. If the cold didn't kill me, the carbon monoxide would, or perhaps he hoped I would wake up, strike a match in confusion, and incinerate the evidence of his debts. It was a win-win for him. A tragic gas leak caused by a senile man who left the stove on. I watched his face on the small screen. It was illuminated by the blue light of the digital clock on the oven. He looked sweaty, pale, terrified. He looked like a rat cornered by a cat. I stared at that face, and a memory hit me so hard it almost knocked the wind out of me. 7 years ago. Toby sat in my office weeping. He was just a boy, then fresh out of college, dating Sarah. He had confessed to me that he was $80,000 in debt from student loans and bad credit cards. He said he couldn't marry Sarah with that weight on his shoulders. He wanted to be a man worthy of her. I believed him. I saw a young man who wanted to build a future. That afternoon, I wrote a cashier's check for $80,000. I paid off every cent. I did it anonymously through a shell company, so he would never feel indebted to me, so he could stand tall at the altar. I thought I was investing in my daughter's happiness. I looked at the screen at the man turning the gas valve. I hadn't invested in her happiness. I had financed a monster. I had paid for the suit he wore to marry her. I had paid for the peace of mind that allowed him to gamble away $500,000. My kindness hadn't saved him. It had enabled him to become this. I put the phone in my pocket and reached back into my stash. I pulled out the industrial respirator mask I kept for asbestos removal jobs. I strapped it on the rubber seal tight against my face, the filters heavy and reassuring. I looked like a figure from a dystopian nightmare standing in the freezing dark of my bedroom, watching my family try to kill me. The smell of rotten eggs mercaptan began to seep under the door. The gas was rising. I didn't panic. I moved to the window Catherine had opened. The fresh air was my lifeline. I sat in the armchair by the window, the freezing wind buffering against my insulated suit, the mask filtering out the poison seeping from the hallway. I was an astronaut on a hostile planet. I sat there for hours watching the camera feed. Toby had gone back to the living room. He and Catherine were huddled on the sofa, wrapped in blankets, wearing coats. They had cracked the patio door just enough to keep themselves safe while the gas pooled upstairs, where heat and gas naturally rises. They were whispering. I adjusted the audio gain on the camera feed, pressing the earbud deep into my ear. "He is not making any noise," Toby whispered, his voice shaking. "Do you think he is dead yet?" "He has to be," Catherine replied, taking a swig from a flask. It is 10 degrees in there. And the gas, I can smell it from here. His heart won't take the strain. What if he wakes up, Toby asked. What if he smells it? He won't. Catherine snapped. The sedatives I gave him were enough to knock out a horse. He will drift off from the cold and never wake up. It is painless. It is mercy, really. Mercy. She called murder mercy. They sat in silence for a long time, listening for the thud of a body or the gasp of a dying man. I gave them neither. I sat like a stone statue, breathing rhythmically through my filters, my eyes fixed on the door handle, waiting for it to turn. Around 4 a.m, Toby stood up. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. I can't take this waiting, he hissed. The Kartsev brothers called me again. They said if I don't have the first installment by Friday, they are going to start mailing pieces of me to Sarah. Catherine grabbed his arm. Calm down. By morning we will have a widow and an inheritance. And if we don't, Toby snarled, pulling away from her. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. If that old stubborn bastard is still breathing when the sun comes up, I am done playing games. No more pills. No more gas. He leaned in close to her, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that the microphone barely picked up. If he is not dead by hypothermia or asphyxiation tonight, tomorrow I use the stairs. I will push him down them myself. I will beat him until he stops moving, and we will say he fell. I don't care about the investigation anymore. I don't care about the nursing home. I can't wait for a court order. He looked at his watch. I have 48 hours, Catherine. 48 hours before they kill me. If he is alive at breakfast, I am ending him with my bare hands. Catherine looked at him, and for a second I thought she might protest. I thought she might show a flicker of the woman I married. Instead, she nodded. Just make sure Sarah isn't home when you do it, she said. That was the final seal. The final shred of my past life incinerated in the invisible gas filling my home. They were past the point of return. And so was I. I checked the battery on my recording device. I had it all. The conspiracy. The attempt. The deadline. The sun began to bleed gray light through the open window. The wind died down. I stood up, my joints stiff, but my resolve harder than diamond. I took off the mask and hid it back in the closet. I stripped off the thermal suit and hid it away. I put on my pajamas, shivering violently as the freezing air hit my skin. I needed to look like a victim one last time. I sat on the edge of the bed, creating the tableau they expected. A confused, freezing old man who had miraculously survived the night. I heard the gas shut off downstairs. They were airing out the house before discovering me. The lock clicked. The door opened. Toby stood there, a tire iron in his hand, hidden behind his leg. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and disappointment that I was sitting upright. Dad, he stammered. You are awake. I looked at him, letting my teeth chatter, letting my body shake. Cold, I whispered. So cold. Toby looked at the open window, then at me. A look of pure hatred crossed his face. He tightened his grip on the tire iron. He was calculating the distance. He was deciding if he should do it right now. But then Sarah's voice echoed from the driveway. Mom, Toby. I am here to pick up some clothes. Toby flinched. He shoved the tire iron into his waistband and covered it with his jacket. He forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. Sarah is here, he said, his voice tight. You got lucky, old man. Get dressed. We are going for a ride. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't drop my gaze. I looked straight into his eyes, and I let a fraction of the real Bill Harrington show through. A ride. I repeated, my voice steady. Good. I have some places I need to be." He frowned, sensing the change but unable to place it. He didn't know that the man he was looking at wasn't a victim. He was a witness, a judge, and very soon, an executioner. And his 48 hours had just started ticking down. Sarah walked back to her car, her face a mask of worry and confusion, believing Toby lie that he was taking me to a specialized memory care unit for an assessment. I watched her go, a knot tightening in my stomach. She was innocent in this, a victim of her own trust, just as I had been. As soon as her car disappeared down the long driveway, the mask dropped completely from Toby's face. He pulled out his phone and barked a single command. "Bring the van around." A white windowless cargo van that had been idling down the road roared up the driveway. It didn't look like a medical transport. It looked like a vehicle used to make problems disappear. The side door slid open and 2 men stepped out. They wore scrubs that were too tight across their chests, but they moved with the swagger of alley brawlers, not nurses. One had a tattoo of a spider web creeping up his neck, barely concealed by his collar. "Put him in the back," Toby ordered, pointing at me with the tire iron he had pulled back out. "And make sure he stays sedated. I don't care if you have to break his jaw to keep him quiet. Just get him to the facility." The facility. I knew exactly what kind of place he meant. It would be a warehouse for the dying, a place with no cameras and paid-off staff where an old man could succumb to his injuries without an autopsy. The larger of the 2 men stepped onto the porch, his boots heavy on the wood. "Come on, Grandpa," he sneered, reaching out with a hand the size of a shovel. "Do not make this hard." I stood my ground, shivering in my thin pajamas, but my feet were planted shoulder-width apart. The cold morning air filled my lungs, sharpening my senses. For 40 years I had been Bill the builder, Bill the husband, Bill the father. But before that, in the humid jungles of a war long forgotten, I had been Sergeant Harrington. They say you lose your edge with age, but you never lose the instinct for survival. The man reached for my shoulder, expecting frail bones and compliance. As his fingers dug into my shirt, I didn't pull away. I stepped in. I grabbed his pinky and ring finger in a vice grip, twisting them back toward his wrist, with a snap that echoed like a dry branch breaking. He howled, dropping to his knees. Before his partner could react, I drove the heel of my boot into the first man's knee. The joint gave way with a sickening crunch. He collapsed onto the porch, writhing in agony. The second man froze his eyes wide. He looked from his partner to me, trying to reconcile the image of the senile old man with the violence he had just witnessed. "What are you waiting for? Get him!" Toby screamed, backing away, his face losing all its color. The second man lunged, pulling a taser from his belt. I didn't wait. I grabbed a heavy ceramic planter from the porch railing. Catherine favorite azaleas, and swung it with every ounce of strength I had left. It connected with the side of his head, shattering on impact. He dropped like a stone, the taser skittering across the floorboards. I looked at Toby. He was alone now, standing between me and freedom. He raised the tire iron, his hands shaking violently. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I will kill you myself. You don't have the guts, Toby." I said, my voice low and steady, the voice of a man who had stared down union bosses and mafia extortionists. "You are a parasite, and parasites can't survive without a host." I took a step toward him. He flinched, swinging the iron wildly. It missed me by a foot. I didn't fight him. I didn't have to. I simply sprinted past him, jumping off the porch railing and landing in the frost-covered grass. I ran for the garage. My lungs burned, my old knees protested, but I felt more alive than I had in a decade. I reached the side door and punched in the code. The door slid up. There it was. My 1998 Ford F-150. Rusty, dented, and faithful. Catherine hated it. She begged me to sell it every year. But I kept it because it was the only thing in this life that was exactly what it appeared to be. Tough. Reliable. Unbreakable. I grabbed the magnetic key from the wheel while my fingers numb from the cold. I threw the door open and slid onto the cracked leather seat. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, and then roared to life, a defiant growl that shook the dust from the rafters. I threw it into reverse and peeled out of the garage tires, spinning on the gravel. I spun the wheel facing the long driveway that led to the main road, and there was Toby. He had run to the main gate, the massive wrought iron barrier that marked the entrance to the estate. He slammed it shut and threw the heavy bolt, locking it. I stood behind it, panting, holding up the keys with a triumphant sneer. "You are not going anywhere, old man," he screamed. "That is solid steel. You will crush yourself." I stopped the truck 50 yards away. I revved the engine, staring at the gate. To anyone else, it looked like an impenetrable fortress, but I looked at it with the eyes of a master contractor. I remembered the day that gate was installed 3 years ago. I had given Toby a budget of $20,000 to install a high-security reinforced steel gate. I remembered reviewing the invoices later and noticing discrepancies. I remembered inspecting the welds one night and realizing they were sloppy. Toby had pocketed $15,000 and installed a hollow aluminum decorative gate that looked like steel but had the structural integrity of a soda can. He had cheated me to pay a gambling debt, and now that cheat was going to be his undoing. I shifted the truck into low gear. I gripped the wheel. "Bet on the wrong horse, Toby," I whispered. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator. The truck surged forward, picking up speed. 20 miles per hour. 30, 40. Toby's smile vanished. He realized too late that I wasn't bluffing. He scrambled out of the way, diving into the hedges just as the chrome bumper of my Ford made contact. The sound was deafening, not a metallic clang, but a screeching tear as the hollow aluminum buckled instantly. The gate flew off its hinges, twisting into a pretzel of scrap metal. The truck shuddered violently, the windshield spiderwebbing, but the heavy steel frame of the old pickup held true. I plowed through the wreckage, sending pieces of Toby cheap gate flying into the air like confetti. I didn't slow down. I hit the asphalt of the main road and turned left toward the city, leaving the ruins of my prison behind me. I drove for an hour, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for police lights or black SUVs, but the road remained empty. I reached the city limits as the morning commute began blending my battered truck into the sea of traffic. I navigated the familiar streets of downtown Chicago, driving toward the steel and glass spire that housed the headquarters of Blackwood and Associates. I pulled into the underground VIP garage using a code that hadn't changed in 20 years. The valet, a young man who looked like he had never seen a speck of dirt in his life, stared at my truck with open-mouth horror. Oil was dripping from the undercarriage, and the front bumper was hanging by a single bolt. "Sir, you cannot park that here," he started, stepping forward. I opened the door and stepped out. I was wearing pajamas covered in mud, a flannel jacket, and one boot. I looked like a homeless man who had stolen a vehicle. "Park it," I said, tossing him the keys. "And be careful with the transmission. Second gear sticks." Before he could protest, I walked to the private elevator. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. A red light scanned my palm. "Welcome, Chairman Harrington," the automated voice said smoothly. The doors slid open. I rode the elevator to the 50th floor, the silence giving me a moment to compose myself. I wasn't just escaping. I was arriving. The doors opened directly into the penthouse office. It was a space of mahogany leather and power. Standing by the window looking out over the city he owned a piece of was Arthur Blackwood. He turned as I entered. He didn't flinch at my appearance. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply nodded. "The barber is in the side room, William. The tailor is waiting with your measurements. Your suit is pressed." I walked past him, heading straight for the Scotch decanter. I poured a glass and downed it in one swallow, feeling the burn chase away the last of the winter chill. "Did you get the files?" I asked. Blackwood tapped a thick leather folder on his desk. "Everything." The toxicologist report came back positive for heavy sedatives and a chemical compound found in rat poison. It was a slow kill, William. I clenched my jaw. And the financials, worse than we thought. Toby isn't just in debt. He has been embezzling from the construction firm you own, the one you let him manage. He has siphoned off nearly $3 million in phantom material costs. And Catherine, she took out a second mortgage on the farmhouse 2 weeks ago, forged your signature. They had hollowed out my life from the inside. I went into the side room. For the next hour I sat in silence as the barber shaved off the gray stubble of the confused old man. I let the hot towel soak away the grime of the basement. I put on the crisp white shirt, the silk tie, the charcoal 3-piece suit that had been tailored in London. I slipped on the Patek Philippe watch that I had kept in the safe for special occasions. When I looked in the mirror, Bill, the retiree, was gone. The man staring back was William Harrington, the man who had built this city, who had crushed unions and negotiated with senators. The eyes were the same, but the predator was back behind them. I walked back into the main office. Blackwood was on the phone, but he hung up immediately when he saw me. He stood up and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect he offered to almost no one. "Welcome back, Mr. Chairman," he said. I walked to the head of the conference table and sat down. "Set up the meeting, Arthur," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Invite Toby. Invite Catherine. Invite Sarah. Tell them the board of directors is holding an emergency gala to announce the new CEO. Tell Toby he is the front-runner." "He will think he won," Blackwood said, smiling. "Exactly," I replied. "Let him think he has won everything. Let him walk into that room thinking he is a king, because I want to look him in the eye when I take his crown." I opened the file on the desk, revealing the evidence of their betrayal. "The old man died in that farmhouse, Arthur. Tonight, the chairman goes hunting." The polished mahogany conference table was covered in documents that detailed the systematic destruction of my legacy. I sat at the head of the table, a tumbler of aged scotch, untouched, near my hand, watching the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. The local news was on, and my face was plastered across the screen. It was an old photo, one taken at a barbecue 5 years ago, where I looked particularly disheveled. The banner underneath read, "Missing and endangered elderly man suffering from dementia, violent and confused." They had wasted no time. Catherine and Toby had called the police immediately after I smashed through the gate. They told the officers I had suffered a psychotic break, that I had attacked my son-in-law with a weapon, and that I had fled in a vehicle I was no longer licensed to drive. They had turned the entire city into a hunting ground, and I was the prey. A silver alert had been issued. Every patrol car in Chicago was looking for a rusted Ford F-150 driven by a lunatic. Arthur Blackwood muted the television with a disgusted shake of his head. "They are playing the victim card perfectly, William. The police report states Toby is pressing charges for assault with a deadly weapon. They claim you tried to run him down. If you step outside this building, you will be arrested at gunpoint." "Let them look," I said, my voice calm. "The truck is already being scrapped at a yard your associates own. The old man they are looking for doesn't exist anymore." I turned my attention back to the files spread out before me. Blackwood's forensic accountants had been busy. What they found wasn't just negligence. It was grand larceny on an industrial scale. I picked up a stack of invoices marked Vanguard Construction. Vanguard was one of the mid-sized firms I had acquired quietly a decade ago. It was the company where I had pulled strings to get Toby a job as a project manager 5 years ago. I wanted him to learn the business from the ground up to earn his keep. I flipped through the pages. Phantom vendor payments. Invoices for high-grade steel that was swapped for cheap iron. Overbilling for labor crews that never existed. He didn't just borrow money from loan sharks. "Arthur," I said, tracing a line of fraudulent transactions. "He has been gutting Vanguard from the inside out. Look at this." He billed the company $200,000 for concrete foundations on the riverfront project. I visited that site last month in my disguise. The foundations were precast. He pocketed the difference. Blackwood nodded grimly. It totals $3.2 million over 4 years. He has been feeding his gambling addiction with your money, William. The irony is he thinks he is stealing from a faceless conglomerate. He has no idea Vanguard is a subsidiary of Harrington Holdings. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He has been stealing from his own inheritance. He has been robbing the hand that fed him, thinking he was outsmarting a corporate giant. He is sloppy, Blackwood noted. He left digital fingerprints everywhere. He signed off on these invoices personally. We have him on wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft. I can call the district attorney right now. We can have the FBI raid his house before dinner. I leaned back in the leather chair, tenting my fingers. The temptation was strong. To see him dragged out in handcuffs, to see Catherine weeping as the assets were seized. But it wasn't enough. An arrest would allow them to play the victim. They would spin it. They would say the evil corporation was scapegoating a hard-working employee. They would say I was a confused old man, manipulated by lawyers. I needed something definitive. I needed a public execution of their character. No police yet, I said. Blackwood frowned. William, he is dangerous. He tried to gas you. And if we arrest him now, he becomes a martyr to my daughter, I countered. Sarah still thinks he is her protector. She thinks I am the villain. If I destroy him in the dark, she will never forgive me. She needs to see the monster without the mask. So what is the play? Blackwood asked. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I want you to organize a gala. Tomorrow night. The Ritz-Carlton. Make it the event of the season. Call it the Harrington Holdings Annual Leadership Summit. That is impossible to pull off in 24 hours, Blackwood started, but I cut him off. You are Arthur Blackwood. You can pull off a miracle in an hour. Send an invitation to Toby. A platinum invitation. Tell him the board of directors has been watching his performance at Vanguard. Tell him the mysterious chairman is stepping down and looking for a successor. Tell him he is on the short list for CEO. Blackwood's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his face. You want to bait him with the one thing he wants more than money. Power, I confirmed. His ego is his Achilles heel. If he thinks he is being promoted, he will walk into that room like a king. He will bring Catherine to show off. He will bring Sarah to witness his triumph. And when he gets there, Blackwood asked. When he gets there, I will be waiting, I said. I want the ballroom filled with the city elite. Judges, politicians, business leaders. And I want the police waiting in the wings. I want his fall to be televised. Blackwood tapped a note on his pad. It is risky. If he suspects anything. He won't, I said. He thinks I am a fugitive shivering in a ditch somewhere. He thinks he has won. He is arrogant, Arthur, and arrogance blinds you faster than bleach. Make the call I ordered. Tell him the chairman requests his presence. Tell him to wear a tuxedo. Blackwood picked up the phone and began barking orders to his staff. I turned back to the table, but my eyes were drawn to the tablet sitting on the side. It was linked to the hidden camera system in my farmhouse. I picked it up. The feed was grainy but clear enough. It showed my study, the sanctuary where I had spent years reading and planning. Catherine was there. She wasn't the composed, grieving wife she played for the police. She was a hurricane of rage. She held a crowbar in her manicured hands. The room was destroyed. Books were torn from the shelves, lying in heaps on the floor. The landscape paintings I loved were slashed. She was looking for something. She moved to the wall behind the desk, swinging the crowbar with a strength born of desperation. Plaster and drywall exploded. She was looking for the wall safe. She knew I kept one, though I had never given her the combination. I watched her pry the safe door open, her face twisted in a rictus of greed. She expected to find cash. She expected to find bearer bonds or gold. She reached inside, her hand scrabbling in the dark metal box. She pulled out a single envelope. I watched her tear it open, her hands shaking. She pulled out the contents. It wasn't money. It was a stack of photos. Photos of her meeting her lover at the motel. Photos of her entering the underground casino. And a letter. I knew what the letter said because I had written it 10 years ago, just after I retired. It was a letter to my wife meant to be read after my natural death. It detailed my love for her, my gratitude, and the location of the trust fund that would take care of her for the rest of her life. But I had replaced that letter this morning, just before I escaped. I watched her read the new note. I saw her face go pale, then red. She screamed a soundless cry on the muted video and threw the paper at the camera she didn't know was there. She didn't find millions. She found a photocopy of her own credit card debt and a note that simply said, "I know, keep looking, Catherine." I whispered to the screen. "Tear the house down. Burn it to the ground. You won't find a penny. The only thing you are going to find in that house is the evidence that will send you to prison." She fell to her knees amidst the rubble of my study, weeping. Not tears of remorse, but tears of a thief who realizes the vault is empty. I turned off the tablet. I didn't need to watch anymore. They were cornered rats, starving and vicious. Tomorrow night I would put them out of their misery. I looked at Blackwood, who had finished his call. "It is done," he said. Toby accepted. He sounded like he won the lottery. "He is bringing the whole family." "Excellent," I said, buttoning my jacket. "Where are you going?" Blackwood asked. "You need to rest. You look like you have gone 12 rounds. "I am going to the site," I said. "The site. The new high-rise on Michigan Avenue. The one Toby is supposedly managing. I want to see the books myself. I want to see exactly where he buried the bodies. If I am going to destroy him tomorrow, I need to know every nut and bolt of his failure." "William, it is dangerous. The police." "I have a new car, a new suit, and a new face," I said, gesturing to my clean-shaven jaw. "Nobody looks at the chairman. They only look at the power." I walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. The hunt was entering its final phase. They had tried to bury me in the cold, but they forgot that I was the seed, and tomorrow the harvest would be blood. The heavy cream cardstock felt like salvation in Toby's hands. He stood in the wreckage of my study, the debris of Catherine Rampage still scattered on the floor, but he wasn't looking at the destruction anymore. He was staring at the embossed gold lettering of the invitation that a courier had just hand-delivered. It was heavy, expensive, and smelled faintly of old money. "It is happening, Catherine," he breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of hysteria and relief. "Look at this. The chairman. The actual chairman of Harrington Holdings wants to see me." Catherine snatched the card from him, her eyes scanning the text greedily. "Annual Leadership Summit, Ritz-Carlton, private audience regarding executive restructuring." "Restructuring," she whispered. "That means a promotion." "It means CEO." Toby corrected, a manic grin spreading across his face. He paced the room, kicking aside a torn book without noticing. "I heard rumors that the old leadership was clearing house. They want fresh blood. They want someone who has delivered on the big projects. That is me, Catherine. I am the golden boy." He laughed, a sound that bordered on madness. "Do you know what a CEO package looks like? Signing bonus, stock options, a salary that makes my current paycheck look like minimum wage." "Is it enough?" Catherine asked, her voice sharp. "Is it enough to pay the Russians by Friday?" "It is enough to pay them 10 times over," Toby shouted. "I can get an advance on the signing bonus tomorrow. I can walk into that meeting with Kartsev and throw the money in his face. We are saved, Catherine. We are actually saved." They hugged amidst the ruins of my life, clinging to each other like shipwreck survivors who had just spotted land. They didn't see a trap. They saw a lifeline. Their arrogance was so blinding, they didn't pause to question why a chairman they had never met would promote a project manager who was currently under investigation for embezzlement, an investigation they didn't know existed yet. "We have to be perfect," Catherine said, pulling away and smoothing her hair. "We need to look like the dynasty we deserve to be. We need Sarah there. We need to present a united front." "What about the old man?" Toby asked, his face darkening. "The police still haven't found him. If he shows up—" "He won't," Catherine snapped. "He is probably frozen in a ditch somewhere, or wandering the streets talking to pigeons. And if he does show up, who is going to believe him? He is the crazy old man who attacked you. You are the future CEO of a billion-dollar empire. You are untouchable." She walked to the window, looking out at the driveway where my truck used to be parked. But just in case, she murmured, "We need to cover our bases. If the press is there, they might ask about him. We need a paper trail of concern." She pulled out her phone. I watched from the hidden camera feed in Blackwood office as she dialed my number. I picked up my burner phone not to answer, but to watch the call come in. I let it go to voicemail. On the screen, I watched her face transform. The sneer vanished. Her eyes softened into a practiced mask of worry. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming trembling and tearful. "Bill, honey, please pick up. I am so worried about you. It has been 2 days. I don't know where you are or if you are warm. Please just come home. We are not angry. We just want you safe." She paused for effect, wiping away a non-existent tear. "There is big news, Bill. Toby is being honored tonight. The company is giving him a huge promotion. It is everything we dreamed of for him. We have to be there to support him. You have to be there. We need to be proud of him together. Please, honey, come home so we can be a family again." She hung up, and immediately the sneer returned. "There," she said, "if the police pull his phone records, they will see a loving wife begging her sick husband to return." "Brilliant," Toby said. "Now go get ready. We have a gala to conquer." High above the city, in the silence of the penthouse, I hit the stop button on the recording. I replayed her message one more time. "We need to be proud of him." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that startled Blackwood, who was sitting across the desk reviewing a stack of contracts. "She wants me to be proud." "Arthur," I said, tossing the phone onto the leather blotter. "She wants the doting father-in-law to applaud while the wolf eats the sheep." "They took the bait," Blackwood confirmed. "Toby, SVPD 4 minutes ago. He requested a table near the front." "Of course he did," I said. "He wants the spotlight." I stood up and walked over to the desk. Blackwood had prepared the documents I requested. They were complex financial instruments, the kind of paperwork that moved mountains without making a sound. "The Kartsev debt?" I asked. Blackwood nodded. "My broker made contact with the syndicate an hour ago. The Russians were pragmatic. They don't care who pays as long as they get paid. They were actually quite happy to offload a high-risk debtor like Toby." "How much?" I asked. $550,000, Blackwood said. "That includes the late fees and the VIG." I pulled a checkbook from my inside pocket. It wasn't the joint account I shared with Catherine. It was drawn on the Harrington Trust, an account with a balance that looked like a telephone number. I wrote the check without hesitation. My hand didn't shake. This wasn't spending money. This was buying a weapon. "Buy it," I said, sliding the check across the desk. "I want the promissory note in my hand before the gala starts." Blackwood took the check. "You realize what this makes you, William? You are not just his boss anymore." "I know," I said, a dark satisfaction settling in my chest. "I am his owner. When he walks into that ballroom tonight, he won't be walking toward a promotion. He will be walking into a foreclosure." And Catherine Blackwood asked. I picked up another file. The credit card companies. Credit card. The second mortgage holder. Buy those two, I ordered. All of it. Every cent she owes. I want to hold the deed to the farmhouse. I want to hold the note on her jewelry. I want to own the clothes on her back. That will cost another 300,000, Blackwood warned. Do it, I said. By tonight, I want them to have nothing that doesn't belong to me. When I strip them down, I want them to realize they have been living in a house of cards, and I am the wind. Blackwood nodded and left the room to execute the orders. I was left alone with the view of the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the skyline. Somewhere out there, Toby was putting on his tuxedo, thinking he was the king of the world. Somewhere out there, Sarah was getting dressed, probably crying, believing her father was lost and insane. I walked to the full-length mirror in the corner of the office. The man reflecting back was a stranger to the life I had lived for the last 40 years. The flannel was gone. The work boots were gone. I was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo with a satin lapel. My shirt was crisp white, the studs black onyx. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. I adjusted my tie, tightening the knot until it sat perfectly against my collar. You wanted a show, Catherine, I whispered to the reflection. You wanted us to be proud. I leaned in closer, looking into my own eyes. The eyes that had seen war, that had seen poverty, that had seen the betrayal of the people I loved most. Tonight, Dad will show you what true pride actually costs. I turned away from the mirror. The sun had set. The city lights were coming on a million little stars, witnessing the return of the chairman. It was time to go to the ball. The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom cast a golden glow over the assembled elite of Chicago. It was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, a congregation of power and money. At the center of it all stood Toby Vance. He looked like he had been born in a tuxedo. He held a flute of vintage champagne, his other hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a silver-haired senator. He was laughing, a loud, confident sound that grated on my ears as I watched from the wings. He was radiant with the anticipation of his coronation. Catherine stood beside him, draped in a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. She wore a diamond necklace that I knew was paste, a replica of the one she had pawned weeks ago to cover her gambling debts. But under the ballroom lights, it sparkled enough to fool the casual observer. She was playing the part of the Dowager Queen, accepting compliments with a gracious nod. Her eyes scanning the room, not for friends, but for net worth. Standing slightly behind them, looking like a ghost at a wedding, was Sarah. She wore a simple black dress, her face pale and drawn. She wasn't drinking. She kept checking her phone, likely waiting for news from the police about her missing, demented father. My heart ached for her. She was the only innocent person in this room, a lamb being led by wolves who were currently patting themselves on the back. I adjusted my cufflinks, feeling the cold metal against my wrist. Blackwood stood beside me in the shadows. "Are you ready, Mr. Chairman?" he whispered. "I have been ready for 20 years, I replied. Out on the floor, Toby raised his glass for a toast. He didn't have the microphone yet, but his voice carried over the murmurs of the crowd. To the future, he proclaimed, clinking glasses with the senator. And to new leadership. It is time to trim the fat and build something leaner, something stronger. He was talking about firing people. He was talking about gutting the company I built to pay off his Russian debt. The arrogance was breathtaking. He truly believed he had pulled it off. He believed the old man was freezing in a ditch, and the CEO title was his birthright. The lights in the ballroom suddenly dimmed. The hum of conversation died down, replaced by a hushed expectancy. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty podium at the center of the stage. The heavy velvet curtains behind the podium remained closed. The voice of the master of ceremonies boomed over the speakers, reverberating through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, employees of the Harrington Group, thank you for joining us on this historic evening." Toby puffed out his chest. He nudged Catherine. "This is it," he mouthed. He took a step forward, ready to be called up. He was already rehearsing his acceptance speech in his head, a speech about vision and synergy, and all the other hollow words thieves use to hide their crimes. For 2 decades, the MC continued, our company has been guided by a silent hand, a leader who built this empire from the ground up, valuing integrity, hard work, and loyalty above all else. Tonight, we mark a new chapter. Toby smiled a predatory grin. He adjusted his bow tie. Tonight, the MC said, his voice rising. The chairman steps out of the shadows to address the future of this company. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the owner and founder of Harrington Holdings, Mr. William Harrington. The name hung in the air for a split second, disjointed from reality. Toby's smile froze. He blinked, confused. He turned to Catherine. Harrington, he whispered. That is the old man name. Why would they? Before he could finish the thought, the curtains parted. I stepped into the spotlight. I wasn't hunching. I wasn't shuffling. I walked with the stride of a man who owned the floorboards beneath his feet. My tuxedo fit perfectly. My face, clean-shaven and sharp, was set in a mask of absolute authority. I looked out at the sea of faces blindingly bright in the stage lights, but I only saw 3. Toby's reaction was visceral. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It didn't just fall. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment, before shattering on the marble floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silent room. Champagne splashed onto his polished shoes, but he didn't move. His mouth hung open, his eyes bulging, as if he were seeing a corpse walk. Catherine let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She brought her hands to her throat, clutching the fake diamonds. Her legs gave way, and she stumbled back, clutching Sarah's arm to stay upright. Her face went from the flush of triumph to the gray of a tombstone in a heartbeat. And Sarah, my daughter. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just stared. She took a step forward, her eyes squinting against the light, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful tycoon on stage with the father she thought was lost in the fog of dementia. Dad, she whispered. The microphone picked it up. Or maybe the room was just that quiet. I walked to the podium. I placed my hands on the wood, leaning forward. I looked directly at Toby. I saw the moment his brain tried to reject what it was seeing. He was shaking his head slightly, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over again. He looked at the exit, but the doors were blocked by 2 large men in suits, my security. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was deep, steady, and amplified to god-like proportions. A ripple went through the crowd. They knew Bill Harrington, the myth. They didn't know Bill Harrington, the man. And they certainly didn't expect him to be the father-in-law of the man expecting a promotion. I know there were rumors of a transition tonight. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Toby. Rumors of a new CEO, a young visionary to take the reins. Toby's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to hold himself up. He looked like he was going to vomit. "But I am afraid there has been a change of plans," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. I looked at Catherine. She was trembling so violently, her jewelry rattled. She knew. In that moment, she knew it was all over. The gas, the pills, the lies, I saw it all. "Welcome, family." I said the word, dripping with irony. I gestured to the front row where 3 empty seats waited. "Please, take your seats. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, you are okay. You are him." I looked at her, softening my expression for just a second. "I am here, Sarah, and I am wide awake." Toby tried to run. It was a pathetic, jerky movement. He turned toward the side door, but Blackwood stepped out from the wings, blocking his path with a sheet of paper in his hand. Toby froze. He looked back at me, trapped. Sit down, Toby, I commanded. The voice wasn't a request. It was an order from a superior officer. He collapsed into the chair, a puppet whose strings had been cut. Catherine sat next to him, burying her face in her hands. Sarah sat slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, a mixture of awe and terror on her face. Tonight is not a celebration, I announced to the room. The guests shifted uncomfortably. They sensed the blood in the water. They were sharks too, after all. They knew a takedown when they saw one. Tonight is not a promotion party, I said, my voice booming. Tonight is an audit. I signaled to the tech booth. The lights in the ballroom dimmed further, plunging the audience into darkness. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. Let us review the qualifications of our candidate, I said. The screen didn't show a resume. It showed a video clip. It was grainy black and white night vision. It showed a kitchen. My kitchen. It showed a man standing by a stove. Toby let out a strangled cry. No. On the screen, the man reached out and turned the gas knobs. 1, 2, 3. He stood there listening to the hiss. Then he turned and looked at the camera he didn't know was there. His face was clear. His intent was unmistakable. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A woman in the back screamed. That is attempted murder, I said calmly. The image changed. It was a document. A bank transfer. Here we have a withdrawal of $200,000 from the Vanguard construction accounts, I narrated. Authorized by project manager Toby Vance. Destination: an offshore account linked to the Kartsev syndicate. Murmurs of shock turned into a roar of outrage. The board members in the front row stood up, pointing, shouting. And here I continued relentlessly. We have a recording. Audio filled the room. It was Catherine's voice, clear and sharp. I crush it into his soup every night. He thinks it is just a vitamin. 3 more doses and his brain will be mush. Catherine looked up, her face a mask of horror. She looked at Sarah. Sarah had pulled her hand away from her mother as if she had been burned. She was looking at Catherine with a look of absolute revulsion. Mom, Sarah choked out. You drugged him, Catherine tried to speak, but no words came out. She just shook her head, tears ruining her makeup, turning her face into a grotesque clown mask. I stepped out from behind the podium. I walked to the edge of the stage, towering over them. You wanted my money, I said to the silent room. You wanted the power that comes with this name. You thought I was a senile old man standing in the way of your fortune. I looked at Toby. He was weeping now, snot running down his face, a broken, pathetic figure. You forgot one thing, Toby, I said. I built this company with concrete and steel. I built it by spotting cracks in the foundation and tearing down anything that wasn't structural. I pointed at him. You are a crack, Toby. You are a rot. And I am the wrecking ball. I nodded to the side entrance. The doors swung open. 4 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by 2 agents in FBI windbreakers. They marched down the aisle, the sound of their boots heavy on the carpet. Toby Vance, I said. Catherine Harrington, you are relieved of your duties. Permanently. The police reached the table. They pulled Toby from his chair. He didn't fight. He went limp, sobbing, begging. Dad. Please, I am sorry. It was the debt. They were going to kill me. Please, I watched him being handcuffed without a flicker of pity. They were going to kill you in 2 days, Toby, I said. You should thank me. Prison is the safest place for you now. They grabbed Catherine. She screamed a high, thin sound. She reached for Sarah. Sarah, help me. He is lying. He is crazy. Look at him. He is the devil. Sarah stood up. She looked at her mother being dragged away. She looked at the screen where the evidence of their betrayal was still frozen. She turned to me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "He is not the devil, Mom," she said. "He is my father." And with that, she turned her back on her mother. As they dragged the screaming, sobbing wreckage of my family out of the ballroom, I stood alone on the stage. The silence returned heavy and thick. I looked out at the crowd. They were stunned, terrified, and captivated. I adjusted my tie. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. "Now about the future of this company." I had cleared the rot. Now it was time to rebuild. But as I looked at my daughter standing alone and broken in the middle of the room, I knew the hardest work was just beginning. The silence in the ballroom was not the respectful quiet of an audience listening to a speech. It was the vacuum of a room where the air had been sucked out by sheer horror. I stood at the podium looking down at the people who had conspired to end my life. Toby was gripping the tablecloth so hard, his knuckles were white. Catherine was frozen, her mouth slightly open, a statue of impending ruin. Sarah looked between us, her eyes darting like a trapped bird, desperately searching for a reality that made sense. I pressed the button on the remote control in my hand. The massive screen behind me, which had just displayed the company logo, flickered and changed. The image was grainy night vision footage, but the clarity was undeniable. It showed a kitchen. My kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days ago at 3 in the morning. A figure walked into the frame. It was Toby. He wasn't wearing his usual expensive suit. He was wearing gloves and a hoodie. He looked around nervously, checking the shadows, before approaching the high-end gas range I had installed years ago. I narrated the scene, my voice calm and devoid of mercy. Here we see the aspiring CEO performing some late-night maintenance, or at least that is what he might claim. But watch his hands. On the screen, giant and undeniable Toby reached out. He didn't press the ignition. He turned the knob. Once, twice, 3 times. The hiss of gas was inaudible on the video, but the intent screamed from the screen. He stood there for a moment, watching the invisible poison fill the room where his father-in-law slept. He checked his watch. He smiled. A thin, cruel smile that I had never seen before but would now remember forever. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with a gloved hand. The senator who had been toasting Toby moments ago recoiled as if the man next to him had turned into a leper. Toby let out a strangled sound, a high-pitched whine of denial. "No, that is not. That is taken out of context." I didn't stop. I clicked the remote again. The video vanished, replaced by a waveform of an audio recording. "And here we have the matriarch," I said, looking at Catherine, "a woman who claims to spend her days at charity events. Let us hear her charitable thoughts regarding her husband." The audio boomed through the high-quality speakers of the Ritz-Carlton. It was crystal clear. "I crush it into his soup every night. He thinks it is just a vitamin. 3 more doses, and his brain will be mush. He won't even remember his own name, let alone who owns the farm." Catherine's face went from pale to a sickly gray. She clawed at her throat, as if the pearls she wore were strangling her. The recording continued merciless. "Don't let Sarah know. She is too soft. She actually loves the old fool. If she finds out we are speeding up his dementia, she will ruin everything." I looked at Sarah. She had backed away from her mother, her hands trembling violently. She looked at Catherine with a mixture of revulsion and heartbreak that no mother should ever have to see in her child eyes. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking in the silent room. You said he was sick. You said you were helping him." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a spreadsheet. It was a forensic accounting of Vanguard Construction, the subsidiary Toby managed. Red lines crisscrossed the screen, highlighting transfers, withdrawals, and phantom invoices. $3 million, I announced. "That is the sum Toby Vance has siphoned from this company over the last 4 years. Money meant for steel, for concrete, for the wages of honest men. Instead, it went to offshore gambling sites and high-stakes poker games in the basements of Chicago. I pointed to the final document on the screen. It was a toxicology report stamped with the seal of the city leading forensic lab. And this, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is the analysis of the tomato bisque my loving wife served me 2 nights ago. It contained lethal doses of benzodiazepines and rat poison, enough to kill a man twice my size. The room erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was chaos. People were standing, shouting, pointing. The veneer of civilization had cracked, revealing the raw ugliness of the crime. Catherine couldn't take it anymore. The walls were closing in, and her narcissism demanded a defense. She scrambled up from her chair, her designer gown tangling around her legs. She rushed toward the stage, her face twisted into a mask of fury. "It is a lie," she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "He is lying. He is sick. Look at him. He is demented. That video is fake. He used AI. He used technology to frame us. He has been planning this because he is paranoid." She turned to the crowd, her eyes wild. "Don't you see? He is jealous. He is jealous of Toby's success. He made all of this up. That isn't my voice. I never said that. I watched her flail. I watched her try to gaslight a room full of the smartest people in the city. It was pathetic. It was the last thrashing of a drowning animal." I stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at her. I didn't need a microphone anymore. My voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You think this is AI, Catherine?" I asked. "You think I invented the debt you owe? You think I invented the second mortgage you took out on my house?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I tossed it onto the stage at her feet. It landed with a heavy thud. "Open it," I commanded. She stared at the envelope. She didn't move. "Open it," I roared, making her flinch. She bent down, her hands shaking so hard she could barely tear the paper. She pulled out the documents. They weren't fake. They were the original promissory notes. "I may be old, Catherine," I said, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen, "and I may have been blind to your true nature for 40 years. But I am not helpless. I own this building. I own this company. And as of this afternoon, I own you." I pointed to Toby, who was still slumped in his chair, looking like a man awaiting the gallows. "I bought his debt, Catherine. Every cent of the $500,000 he owes to the Kartsev syndicate. I bought it. I am his creditor now. And I bought your credit card debt. I bought the lien on your jewelry. I bought the mortgage you forged." Catherine dropped the papers. She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in her eyes. Not the fear of getting caught, but the fear of total annihilation. "And Sarah," I said, turning my gaze to my daughter, who was standing alone in the aisle, weeping silently. She looked up at me, her eyes red. "The house you live in," I said softly. "The one Toby told you he bought with his bonuses. The one you think is a symbol of his success." Sarah nodded slowly, unable to speak. "He didn't buy it," I said. "I did. I bought it through a shell company 5 years ago. I let him put his name on a fake deed so he could feel like a man, so you could feel secure. But the real deed, the legal title, has been in my safe the entire time." Toby's head snapped up. "What?" he whispered. "You never owned anything, Toby," I said, looking at him with pity and disgust. "You were a squatter in a life I paid for. I paid for your car. I paid for your suit. I paid for the roof over my daughter's head because I wanted her to be happy." I looked back at Catherine. "You called me a miser. You told our friends I was cheap because I drove an old truck and clipped coupons. You didn't know I was saving everything to leave a legacy for your grandchildren. You didn't know I was protecting you from the very wealth that has now destroyed you." Catherine fell to her knees. It wasn't a gesture of prayer. Her legs simply stopped working. She sobbed, clutching the hem of her dress. "Bill, please," she wailed. "I didn't mean it. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at her and felt nothing. The love I had held for 40 years had evaporated in that cold bedroom 2 nights ago. "You don't love me, Catherine," I said. "You loved the idea of my death." I signaled to the wings. The doors opened and the police moved in. They weren't the private security this time. They were uniformed officers led by Detective Miller holding arrest warrants. Toby saw them coming. He looked at the exit, but the path was blocked. He looked at the stage, but I was standing there, a titan of judgment. He looked at Sarah, but she had turned her back on him. Panic took over. He scrambled out of his chair, knocking it over. He fell to his knees, not in supplication, but in cowardice. He crawled away from the approaching officers, his hands raised in surrender. "It wasn't me," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "It was her." He pointed a shaking finger at Catherine, who was still kneeling on the floor. "She made me do it," he yelled, tears streaming down his face. "She is the one who wanted the money. She is the one who got the pills. She told me to turn on the gas. I didn't want to. She threatened me. She said she would tell Sarah about the gambling if I didn't help her kill him." The crowd gasped again. The final betrayal. The alliance of wolves tearing each other apart the moment the trap snapped shut. Catherine stopped crying. She looked at Toby, her eyes wide with shock. "You coward," she hissed. "You spineless worm. You begged me to help you. You said the Russians were going to cut off your fingers." They screamed at each other, hurling accusations and confessions that only dug their graves deeper. The police officers stepped in, pulling them apart. They handcuffed Toby first, dragging him up from the floor. "I am innocent," he blubbered, snot running down his chin. "I am a victim. I have a gambling problem. I need help, not prison." They handcuffed Catherine next. She didn't fight. She just stared at me, her eyes dead. "You planned this," she whispered as they led her past the stage. "You let us do it. You watched us." "I watched you try to murder me, Catherine," I replied. "I just made sure there was an audience for the finale." As they were dragged out the double doors, the room was silent save for the sound of Sarah weeping. I walked down the stairs from the stage. The crowd parted for me, making a wide path. I didn't look at them. I walked straight to my daughter. She looked at me and I saw the shame in her eyes. She felt guilty for their crimes. She felt stupid for believing them. "Dad," she choked out. "I am so sorry." I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as she shook. "It is over, Sarah," I whispered. "The rot is gone. We can start over." But as I held her, I looked at the empty doorway where my wife and son-in-law had vanished. I had won. I had kept my life and my fortune. But the family I had built, the dream I had cherished, was dead. I had burned down the house to kill the termites, and now I was standing in the ashes, holding the only thing that had survived. I led Sarah out of the ballroom, leaving the whispering crowd behind. The chairman had returned, but William Harrington, the husband and father, had died in that farmhouse just as they had intended. And as we walked into the cool night air, I knew that was a grief no amount of money could ever fix. Sarah ran toward the stage, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and tears, the face of a child who has woken up in a nightmare and just wants her father to make it stop. She reached the edge of the stage, her arms outstretched, desperate for a hug, desperate for the familiar comfort of the man she had called Daddy for 30 years. "Dad, please," she sobbed, reaching for my hand. "I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. Just hold me. Please tell me it is going to be okay." I looked down at her. My heart wanted to pull her up, to wrap her in my arms and tell her that I would fix everything, just like I fixed her scraped knees and broken toys when she was little. But the man in the tuxedo, the chairman who had just dismantled a criminal conspiracy, couldn't do that. Not yet. I raised my hand, palm out, stopping her in her tracks. Sarah froze her hands, hovering in the air, her eyes wide with shock. "Don't," I said, my voice cracking slightly, but holding firm. "Do not come up here, Sarah." "Dad," she whispered. "You believed them," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "When they told you I was crazy, you believed them. When they told you I was violent, you believed them. You didn't come to see me. You didn't ask me. You didn't look into my eyes to see if your father was still there. You took the word of a gambler and a liar over the man who raised you. But they are my husband and my mother," she cried. "I trusted them." "And that is your sin," I replied softly. "Blind trust. You let them isolate me, Sarah. You let them turn me into a monster in your mind because it was easier than asking difficult questions. You let them lock me away." She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. "I forgive you for being naive," I said, "and I meant it. You are not evil, Sarah. You are just weak, and right now you need to learn a lesson that I protected you from for too long. You need to stand on your own feet. I cannot carry you through this. You have to watch this. You have to see who they really are." I pointed to the side of the stage where the police were hauling Toby to his feet. "Watch," I commanded. Sarah turned slowly, forcing herself to look. Toby was a mess. The arrogance, the swagger, the CEO facade. It was all gone. He was weeping openly, snot running onto his expensive tuxedo shirt. "Officer, please," he begged as they clicked the cuffs onto his wrists. "I can make a deal. I have information. I know people. I can give you the Kartsev syndicate. Just don't put me in general population. They will kill me. You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder," the officer recited, dragging him toward the exit. Toby looked back at Sarah. "Sarah, baby, tell them. Tell them I am a good guy. We can fix this. Call my lawyer." Sarah stared at him. She looked at the man she had married, the man she thought was a titan of industry. She saw a coward who stole from her father and tried to gas him in his sleep. "Do not speak to me," she whispered. "Do not ever speak my name again." Toby screamed as they dragged him out, a long, wailing sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Then they came for Catherine. She wasn't crying anymore. She was in a state of shock, her mind unable to process the speed of her fall. She stood rigid as the female officer spun her around and cuffed her hands behind her back. "Catherine Harrington, you are under arrest for attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud," the officer said. Catherine looked up at me. Her eyes were cold, dead things. "You can't do this, Bill," she hissed. "I am your wife. We have been married for 40 years. Half of everything is mine. Even if you send me to prison, I will divorce you. I will take half. I will take your company. I will take your millions. I will survive this and I will be rich." I walked down the stairs from the stage slowly, deliberately. I signaled the officers to pause. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space until I could smell the expensive perfume she had bought with my stolen money. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. "You think you are going to get a settlement, Catherine?" I asked, my voice a low rumble. "You think there is a pot of gold waiting for you at the end of your sentence?" "That is the law," she spat back, a flicker of defiance returning to her eyes. "Marital assets. I know you have $15 million hidden away, Bill. I saw the old files. I will get my share." I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You really should have checked the date on those files, Catherine." She frowned, confusion clouding her anger. "This morning," I whispered, "before I came here, I stopped at the bank. I liquidated the Harrington Trust. Every stock, every bond, every cash reserve. $15 million. Her breath hitched. "You moved it. I will find it. Forensic accountants will find it." "You won't find it," I said, "because I didn't hide it. I gave it away." Her eyes widened, bulging in their sockets. I donated it, Catherine. All of it. Every single penny. I wired $15 million to the Margaret Harrington Foundation, the charity named after my mother. The one that builds shelters for abused seniors. It is gone. It is irrevocable. No. She gasped, the color draining from her face completely. You are lying. You wouldn't. I kept enough for a small apartment and a used truck, I said. I am a builder, Catherine. I can start over with a hammer and a nail. But you need the millions. And now you have nothing. Even if you get out of prison in 10 years, you will be destitute. You killed your husband for a fortune that doesn't exist anymore. A sound tore from her throat, a guttural, animalistic noise of pure despair. It wasn't the scream of a woman losing her husband. It was the scream of a parasite realizing the host was dead, and there was no meat left on the bone. You bastard! She shrieked, thrashing against the officer grip. You evil bastard! I hate you! I have always hated you! Get her out of here, I said, straightening my jacket and stepping back. The officers dragged her away, kicking and screaming, her curses fading as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. The ballroom was silent again. The guests, the elite of the city, stared at me with a mixture of awe and fear. They had come for a party and witnessed a Greek tragedy. I looked at Sarah. She was standing alone in the middle of the aisle, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering as if the air conditioning had suddenly dropped 20 degrees. She looked at the empty doorway where her husband and mother had vanished. Then she looked at me. She didn't run to me again. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth, accepting the weight of it. She turned and walked out a side door, her head bowed, beginning the long, painful journey of rebuilding her own life. I turned back to the stage. I walked up the stairs, my steps heavy. I stood at the podium one last time, looking out at the empty chairs in the front row, where my family should have been. I was the chairman. I was the victor. I had won the war. But as I looked at the debris of my personal life scattered across the floor of the Ritz-Carlton, I realized the cost of victory. I was alone. I took a deep breath, adjusting my cufflinks. Meeting adjourned, I said to the silent room. I walked off the stage, my head held high, not looking back. The pain was there, a dull ache in my chest that I knew would never fully go away. But as I walked through the kitchen exit and out into the cool night air, I felt something else. The wind hit my face. The city lights twinkled above. I took a breath, and it didn't smell of gas or betrayal. It smelled of rain and asphalt and possibility. I was alone, but I was free. And for William Harrington, that was enough. The engine of my 1998 Ford F-150 hummed with a steady rhythmic vibration that felt like a heartbeat against my palms. It wasn't the sputtering cough of a dying machine anymore. I had spent the last few months restoring it, replacing the transmission, tuning the engine, and welding the frame. It was still old. It still had dents and scratches that told the story of a life spent working. But underneath the hood, it was brand new, powerful, and reliable, just like me. I drove down the highway, leaving the Chicago skyline behind in the rearview mirror. It was 6 a.m, and the sky was bleeding from indigo to a soft, bruised purple. The air coming through the open window was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and impending spring. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't check the mirrors for people following me. I didn't look over my shoulder. I just drove. The legal storm had finally broken, leaving a silence that was both heavy and peaceful. The sentencing hearing had been 3 days ago. I sat in the back row watching the final act of the tragedy play out. Toby didn't get the leniency he had begged for. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for white-collar predators, saw right through his tears. 15 years. That was the price of his ambition. 15 years in a federal penitentiary for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. When the gavel came down, Toby didn't scream. He just slumped forward, his forehead hitting the defense table with a hollow thud. He looked small. Without his expensive suits, without his arrogance, he was just a terrified boy who had gambled his life away and lost. Catherine fared no better. Her lawyers tried to paint her as a victim of coercion, a wife manipulated by a younger man. But the recordings didn't lie. Her voice, cold and calculating, discussing the dosage of my poison, echoed in the courtroom, destroying her defense. 10 years. 10 years for attempted murder and elder abuse. She didn't cry. She stood rigid, her face a mask of bitter hatred staring straight ahead. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Sarah. She was already gone, locked inside the prison of her own narcissism long before the cell door closed. I turned the truck onto a secondary road, the tires crunching on gravel. I wasn't heading to a board meeting. I wasn't heading to a country club. I was going to work. I passed a small complex of brick apartment buildings on the outskirts of the city. I slowed down, looking up at a second-floor window. The light was on. Sarah was up. She wasn't living in the mansion anymore. That house was sold, the proceeds used to pay off the legitimate creditors and clear the rubble of the financial disaster Toby had left behind. Sarah was living in a 600-square-foot apartment. It was clean. It was safe. But it was small. I paid the rent. That was the one concession I made. But I didn't give her an allowance. I didn't buy her a car. I didn't hire a maid. Sarah worked at the public library now. She spent her days shelving books, organizing reading programs for children, and earning a paycheck that barely covered her groceries and utilities. It was a hard life compared to the one she had known. But it was an honest one. I visited her once a week. We didn't talk about the past much. We talked about books. We talked about the weather. We talked about the future. I saw the changes in her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by practical cardigans and jeans. Her nails weren't manicured, but her eyes were clearer. The fog of dependency was lifting. She was tired, yes, but she was standing on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life. She asked me once why I didn't just give her the money, why I let her struggle when I had millions sitting in the bank. I told her the truth. I told her that money is like water. It can keep you alive or it can drown you. You have to learn how to swim before you jump into the deep end. She didn't like the answer, but she respected it. She was learning that dignity isn't something you inherit. It is something you earn. I accelerated, leaving the apartment complex behind. The road opened up, flanked by fields that were just starting to show the first green shoots of the season. I pulled up to the construction site, a massive lot surrounded by chain-link fences. The sign out front was simple, hand-painted on plywood. The Margaret Harrington Center. I parked the truck next to a line of heavy machinery. The smell of sawdust and wet concrete hit me instantly, a perfume sweeter than any cologne. This was my world. This was where I made sense. I got out of the truck, grabbing my hard hat from the passenger seat. It was battered and scratched, a veteran of a dozen skyscrapers. I didn't wear a suit here. I wore work boots, jeans, and a canvas jacket. The foreman, a burly man named Mike, waved at me from the scaffolding. "Morning, Bill," he shouted. "We are pouring the foundation for the West Wing today. You want to inspect the rebar?" I walked over, my boots sinking into the mud. I didn't just want to inspect it. I wanted to see it. I wanted to feel the steel that would hold this place up. This wasn't an office building. It wasn't a luxury condo for the rich. It was a shelter. A sanctuary for the elderly who had been abused, abandoned, or exploited by their families. It was a place where people like me, people who had been thrown away like garbage, could find safety, dignity, and a new beginning. I had funded it with the $15 million I liquidated from the trust. Every penny Catherine had wanted to steal was now being poured into concrete and steel to protect her victims. It was the ultimate poetic justice. I climbed the ladder to the second level, walking along the unfinished beams. I looked out over the skeleton of the building. I could see the layout of the rooms. Each one would have a window. Each one would be warm. There would be a garden, a library, a workshop. I imagined the people who would live here. The grandmothers whose pensions were stolen. The grandfathers who were told they were burdens. They would come here broken and scared, and we would give them what my family tried to take from me: autonomy, respect, life. I spent the morning working. I didn't sit in a trailer looking at blueprints. I picked up a shovel. I carried lumber. I sweated. My muscles ached, my back protested, but my mind was quiet. There were no lawyers here, no schemes, no lies, just the honest resistance of physical labor. Around noon, I took a break sitting on a stack of drywall eating a sandwich I had made myself. I looked at the workers around me. They were young men, mostly guys trying to feed their families, guys trying to build something real. They didn't know I was a multimillionaire. To them, I was just Bill, the old guy who knew a lot about structural integrity. And that was exactly who I wanted to be. I pulled out my phone. I had one voicemail. It was from the prison. A recorded message stating that inmate Catherine Harrington had requested a visitation. I listened to the robotic voice and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound indifference. I deleted the message. I blocked the number. I had visited her once 2 months ago. It was a mistake, but I needed closure. I sat behind the glass looking at her in her orange jumpsuit. Her hair was gray, the dye having grown out. Her face was lined with bitterness. She didn't apologize. She spent the entire hour screaming at me, blaming me, accusing me of ruining her life. She told me I was cruel. She told me I was heartless. I listened without saying a word. And when she was done panting and red-faced, I simply stood up. "I am not cruel, Catherine," I had said, speaking through the intercom. "I am just a mirror. You are looking at your life and you hate what you see. But you built it. Brick by brick, lie by lie. This cell isn't my doing. It is your masterpiece." I walked away and I never looked back. I finished my sandwich and stood up, dusting the crumbs from my jeans. The sun was high in the sky now, bathing the construction site in a harsh, revealing light. The shadows were gone. I walked back to my truck. The day was half over, but my life felt like it was just beginning. I had 20 years left, maybe more, and I wasn't going to spend them waiting to die. I wasn't going to spend them being a victim. I climbed into the cab of the Ford. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. For a long time, that emptiness had terrified me. It felt like failure. It felt like loneliness. But now I looked at it and I saw space. Space for new plans. Space for peace. Space for a dog, maybe. I had always wanted a dog, but Catherine said they were dirty. I started the engine. I adjusted the rearview mirror. I caught a glimpse of my own eyes. They were older, yes. There were lines around them that hadn't been there a year ago. But they were bright. They were alive. I put the truck in gear and drove out of the site, heading east. The road stretched out before me, a gray ribbon leading toward the horizon. I thought about the words I had said to Sarah the last time we spoke. She had asked me if I missed them, if I missed the family dinners, the holidays, the illusion of togetherness. I looked at the road ahead and spoke out loud, my voice filling the cab of the truck. "Family isn't blood," I said to the empty seat beside me. "Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. Family is loyalty. Family is the people who stand by you when the winter comes. Family is the people who don't turn on the gas while you sleep." I thought of Blackwood, who had fought for me like a brother. I thought of Sarah, who was learning to be honest. I thought of the young foreman Mike, who shared his coffee with me, and sometimes I continued shifting gears, feeling the truck respond to my touch. Sometimes you have to cut off the necrotic flesh to save the body. You have to amputate the rot before it kills the heart. It hurt. Of course it hurt. It was like cutting off a limb without anesthesia. But the wound had cauterized. The infection was gone. And the body was still breathing. I rolled down the window, letting the wind hit my face. It was cold, but it felt good. It felt real. I wasn't William Harrington, the victim. I wasn't William Harrington, the chairman. I was just Bill. And I had a lot of work to do. I drove toward the sunrise, not looking back at the city, not looking back at the prison, not looking back at the ruins of the mansion on the hill. The past was a foreign country, and I had revoked my citizenship. The road ahead was open. The tank was full. And for the first time in 40 years, the man behind the wheel was free. We spend our lives building homes, fortunes, and families, believing that unconditional love is enough to cement the foundation. But I learned the hard way that blind generosity doesn't create gratitude. It often breeds monsters. True wealth isn't the balance in your trust fund, but the peace of knowing you are surrounded by people who value your soul, not your signature. You cannot save those who are determined to drown you to stay afloat. Sometimes the ultimate act of love is not sacrifice, but having the courage to cut the rot away and rebuild your life on a foundation of self-respect. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to save yourself?